Writing with AI is not nearly as easy as a lot of AI critics seem to think. They seem to think that all you have to do is press a button or enter a prompt and out pops a book or an article or essay, whatever it is you're trying to write. And a lot of people that actually try AI quit early because their initial attempts don't produce anything really of any value. The output is not good enough, and so a lot of these people miss out on the opportunities that AI presents. They don't know that with just a few tricks and strategies, you can change your writing using AI from being mediocre to actually being something really good that you can work with that is actually better than what you might have written by yourself. And in this video, we're going to go over some of those foundational strategies to get started writing using AI as your companion tool. We'll cover some of the different AI models that we use, along with some of the tools that make use of those models, as well as some of the key tips and techniques in order to improve your output using AI. Now, if you're new here, my name is Jason Hamilton. I'm normally a fantasy author. I have up to 25 books that I have either published or are in active production, and I've been doing that since 2017. About half of those books were written without any AI assistance, whereas the other half incorporate AI in various capacities. I also worked for 3 years at Kindlepreneur, which is one of the largest and most respected resources for authors who want to learn how to write and publish their books. They're also the same people behind Publisher Rocket and Atticus. And I started this channel after seeing a lot of AI bros talk about how to write a book with ChatGPT or whatever AI tool it is, when these people had clearly not written a book in their life. And that eventually led to me leaving my Kindlepreneur job to focus full time on this channel to tell you how to actually do it and to do it right. We're going to talk about the differences between large language models and tools. We're going to talk about the top large language models that you're likely to encounter, as well as the top tools for long form writing. We'll also talk about using tools versus using an API platform, along with all of the different ways in which you can tweak the AI models in such a way in order to get better output. So let's start with the differences between large language models, which is usually what people are talking about when they talk about AI, versus the different tools that utilize the large language models. The way you can think of this is that the large language models is essentially the fuel. It's the main thing that makes the AI go. These are models that are trained on a large amount of data and then carefully fine-tuned and turned into models that can succeed at various capacities. The tools, on the other hand, are more of a wrapper. They are something that harnesses that fuel of the large language model and puts it in its own organizational structure. And different tools can do different things and facilitate the use of the large language models in its various capacities. There are quite a number of large language models out there. They all have different strengths and weaknesses, but the ones you are most likely to encounter the most are going to be the GPT families. And of course, we know about those through ChatGPT. Although ChatGPT by itself is a tool, not a large language model. It uses multiple GPT models inside of it. And whatever the most latest up-to-date GPT model, that is likely to be the one that you're going to want to use. The same goes for Claude. So Claude comes from a company named Anthropic, and their models are one of my favorite families of models for creative writing in particular. But they're also just a good all-around model for other things. And when I say family of models, I mean there are often several models that they will present to you, and it's not like one is older or better than the other. Some are usually cheaper than others, but not as powerful, and some are more expensive, but more powerful. And so which one you need depends on the use case. Sometimes you don't need a really expensive model to do all your work for. If the smaller model can do the job, then you're better off going with that one, and so forth. The other family of models that you're likely to hear about are the Gemini models. These are the models that come from Google. You can find them in Gemini Advanced, which is their paid tool for it, as well as in various APIs and Google's own API console. Then there is a French startup called Mistral, and they have their Mistral and Pixtral models that are handy. And these are particularly good for writers who want to do not safe for work content. Mistral is usually my go-to models for that sort of thing. And then the other ones you're likely to hear about are the Llama models. These are the ones that come from Meta, the parent company behind Facebook. And so any kind of interaction you have on Facebook that uses AI, or if you use Meta's own AI chat interface, that is using Llama's models. But the interesting thing about Llama is that their models are open source. And what that means is that anybody can take an open source model and fine tune it to do certain tasks. And so there are quite a number of models out there that aren't actually original models. They are just fine tunes of a Llama model, and in some cases a Mistral model, because there are also open source Mistral models as well. So the vast majority of the models that you're probably going to be using fall under one of those categories. And generally speaking, you're going to want to go with whatever is the latest, most advanced version of that model. Although there are some models that are specifically designed to do specific things that you don't necessarily need. For instance, ChatGPT has their own O1 models, which are reasoning models. And we're seeing several of these reasoning models pop up at this point in time. These are models that are specifically geared to think, not necessarily literally, because AI cannot think in literal terms, but it allows them to kind of mull over the different concepts that you're giving it in order to provide a better response. These are usually more expensive models, and they're often not needed for quite a lot of tasks, particularly if you're using AI for writing. It's better for things like editing. And that's one of the biggest benefits of these reasoning models for writers, is its ability to edit. But you don't necessarily need them to do the writing, because what it gives you is not necessarily better than what you can get with a lesser model. But generally speaking, most of these platforms have a single model that's kind of their flagship model, the one that is used in most situations, and those are the ones you're going to want to be paying attention to most of the time. All right, so let's talk tools. Now, there are a ton of tools out there as well, and I'll make sure to do a couple of videos breaking down which tools I think are best for different use cases. But for writers of long form fiction or nonfiction, there are a couple of tools that I recommend. And I generally categorize all of these tools into two categories. We have the chatbots that are kind of generalist, and then we have the specialist tools for specific use cases. And what I usually recommend for most authors and writers is that use two of these tools. Pick one specialist tool to help you in the nitty-gritty of the writing process and to really facilitate that writing process for you. And then have one chatbot tool to be kind of a catch-all for everything else, something that has a nice simple interface that makes the whole process easy. So let's talk about the chatbot category. The most famous of all the chatbots out there is definitely ChatGPT, and they have their ChatGPT Plus subscription, which is $20. Additionally, Claude has their Claude Pro, which is also priced at the same rate, and Google has Gemini Advanced, also priced at the same rate. And those three I would call the big three of the chatbots. There are other chatbots out there, but you'll be probably using one of those three at some point. I want to also give a shout out to Perplexity. I don't use Perplexity as a chatbot like I do with the others, but it is an amazing tool for search and research. I actually use it more than Google these days for various search queries. And if you're doing any kind of research for a book or academic project, Perplexity is the one you want, because it does an amazing job of searching the web, and it will give you the sources when it tells you something, so you can go and verify the information that it tells you. Now, in terms of tools that specialize in writing long form fiction or nonfiction, the tools that I recommend the most are Novelcrafter, RaptorWrite, and Sudowrite. All of these are generally designed to work for books, and you can use them for either fiction or nonfiction. If you want to do something smaller like an article or an essay, you can probably use these as well, but your prompting methods would have to be tweaked just a little bit. And what these tools do is they connect to the large language models through what we call an API. To keep it simple, an API is kind of like the connector between an appliance and your wall socket. So imagine you're taking a kitchen appliance and plugging it into the wall socket. The wall socket and the electricity is the LLM. It's the large language model that's providing you with the AI. And your appliance is the tool that you're using to facilitate and harness that power. And the API is just the connector between the two. In some cases, like in Sudowrite, they do this for you, so you don't have to set up your own API account. But with Novelcrafter and RaptorWrite, you have to set this up yourself. But don't worry, it's actually a really, really simple process, and one you definitely want to do. do. So this is one of the reasons why you might want to consider using the API in addition to or instead of a chatbot. Now, this is ChatGPT, as you can see right here. It's a very simple interface, and that's one of the benefits that you get from just using a chatbot the way it is it does simplify things for you. It allows you to interact using your voice. It allows you to search the web and attach files, etc. And you just put your prompt in here and go to town. But did you know that there are actually ways to manipulate how the AI responds to you on a technical level, and this is not actually as hard as it sounds. So this is different. This you can get to at platform.openai.com. It is also from OpenAI, but this is where you can configure your prompts in a much more hands-on kind of way that gives you much more control. So you can see down here, they have the same chat interface. You interact with it in a chat system, but you can also set a system message, which allows you to add custom instructions here that influence how it responds to you. Now, that's not in and of itself that unique. ChatGPT also has a similar function. If you come up to your account and go to customize ChatGPT, you can do something similar there. But over here on the sides, you get some different options. First of all, you can switch to different models, and there are a lot more models here and available inside of OpenAI's API than you get in ChatGPT. Additionally, if you've done fine-tune models like I have here, you can access those only through OpenAI's Playground and not through ChatGPT. Second, you can actually influence different things here, like the temperature and the max tokens and the top P and a bunch of these others. Most of these you don't really need to worry about or fiddle with, and because this is a beginner tutorial, I'm not going to go into all of them. But the one you are most likely to use are these top two, temperature and max tokens. Now, the temperature is basically just a way of saying how creative it is, but that's kind of a deceptive way of putting it. To understand how these large language models work, it's basically just a really fancy word predictor. It uses probability to determine what the next word is going to be. And if you increase the temperature here, what that does is it actually increases the randomness of those word choices. So the higher your temperature, the more it's likely to just do stuff that's unexpected. And sometimes that increases the creativity of the output that you get. But sometimes, especially if you run it way too far up here at the top, it's going to end up making it pretty unusable. On the flip side, if you bring this below 1, it's going to start being more predictable in its output, meaning it will follow your prompt better, but the output is going to be extremely generic and predictable. So usually I like to leave this either at 1, which is what it is by default, or slightly increased to like 1.2 or between 1 and 1.2 for creative writing. Here in the max tokens, this is just the number, as it says here, the number of tokens to generate shared between the prompt and the completion. So this is how much is it going to be looking at both your prompt and the history behind your prompt and everything like that in terms of the number of tokens it's able to do. Again, I want to keep this simple, but tokens are basically pieces of words, in some case whole words or even whole phrases, that represent an idea inside of the AI's mind, essentially. And all you really need to know is that the higher the tokens, the bigger its memory, right? And so usually when I'm playing around in this API, I want this as high as it'll go, which in this case is 16,000. And if you want a good rule of thumb, times the number of tokens by 0.75, or in other words, 75%. And that's roughly the amount of words that you're going to be able to process using these tokens. So with 16,000 tokens, I know I'm going to get roughly 12,000 words of memory that it can look through, which is enough for most use cases. So the benefits of using an API like you have here in OpenAI is that you get to manipulate these things at will, which you can't do in ChatGPT. And most of these AI platforms have an API dashboard that you can use. The big difference is that they are priced differently, where ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, they're all priced roughly at $20 a month for each of those tools. Working in the API, however, will charge you based on your output. So it's a pay-as-you-go kind of thing. But the good news is it's very unlikely that you're ever going to be paying more than $20 a month unless you're really pushing the limits on these tools. So it's often cheaper to go with the API as well. Now, what the chatbots like ChatGPT Plus lack in manipulation and being able to adjust all of these different parameters, they make up for it in simplicity. And that's why I still recommend that authors have a chatbot, because it will provide just a simple interface to work with the AI in a variety of use cases. And you never know what use cases are going to come up. The other day, I just took a transcript from a YouTube video and asked it to isolate just a little bit of that transcript. And like, I would have never have known what tool to use for that. That's not something that there's a specialist tool out there to do, and you don't necessarily need something like that. So I just ran a quick prompt inside of ChatGPT and said, here's this transcript, isolate this part of the transcript for me and recreate it for me. And it's just saved me time having to search through the transcript manually myself. And so it's instances like that you can't necessarily predict that chatbots are amazing for. And while most of the major platforms out there have their own API that you can access, another one that you're going to want to be paying attention to is called OpenRouter. And the reason that we look at OpenRouter is because it's essentially a hub for every single model that you can think of. Pretty much every model that's widely available is here inside of OpenRouter. So you can just come here to chat and you'll see a familiar chat interface here. You'd say new room and it gives you one model here by default. And then you just say add model and you have a list of literally dozens and dozens, perhaps hundreds of models to choose from. And so I often work inside of OpenRouter as my API of choice, because you can also manipulate the temperature and the top P and all of that inside of OpenRouter as well. And then I also use OpenRouter to connect to the other tools, particularly NovelCrafter and RaptorWrite, because those tools make use of the AI models through OpenRouter. So it's definitely one you want to have on your radar. So I hope that all makes sense. Make sure to let me know in the comments below if you have any more questions about that. And now let's move on to talking about the tips and techniques. And if you're watching this and you would like to write a book, but you don't really know where to start, I would invite you to take a look at my Story Hacker Club, where you'll not only be able to interact with other people on the same journey, but you'll get my step-by-step instructions to take you from nothing with no book published to writing your book, publishing it, and being able to market it. And I make the whole process really simple. All you have to do is follow the steps and you'll be able to make that journey. The price is actually going up soon, and that's because I'm actually in the process right now of hiring a developmental editor and hiring an expert in art and graphic design to be able to help you with your covers and stuff like that. And together they'll be able to answer a lot of questions for you and basically act as additional coaches in addition to myself, who I'm also in there coaching and going live inside of the group multiple times. So this is definitely the best way to get in touch with me and to ask me questions directly to get my answers. And the best part is that upon joining, you will get all of my books that I've written for authors. There's several of them, as well as a number of other resources that I've developed for authors. And you can get started absolutely free. You can cancel before the free trial is over. No questions asked. You can check the link down below or go to storyhacker.ai to get started, and hopefully I'll see you in there. All right, now let's start getting into the actual tips and techniques to actually get good output out of a large language model. Regardless of what tools you are using, all of these techniques are going to apply at some level in all of those tools. But these are also particularly useful in a chatbot interface, so make sure to keep that in mind. The first thing I want to talk about is my FITS formula, F-I-T-S. This stands for framework, identity, task, and style. Starting with the first one, F for framework. Now, framework can be anything where you give the AI some structure in order for it to perform its task sufficiently. So instead of saying, give me an outline for a book, you can say, give me an outline using the hero's journey or using the Save the Cat beats. That simple addition is going to give you much better outputs alone. But you can take this to the next level and provide your own structures, your own frameworks, and it's going to be even better. For instance, I was using AI to do some data entry tasks. The task was I would take a whole bunch of just random information on the internet and I would give it to the AI and it would structure certain bits of that information into a table. So I told it what to look for in the massive information and I told it what should be in each column of the table. And so it was able to go in and accurately find everything that I wanted and structure everything in a very nice, convenient table. And it saved me so much time to do things that way. I also made sure to have it change part of that information into HTML code so that I didn't have to actually add all of the HTML tags myself. That was also a huge time saver. And all of that was something I was able to do by giving it a framework, giving it examples. Oh, and examples are a good way to provide a framework for as well. You say, I want it just done like this. And then you give it the example and describe what you want. That counts as a framework that you can then use to get really good output out of your AI. The I in FIT stands for identity. And this is something that a lot of people have found, is that giving a identity to your AI models kind of narrows down its focus a little bit, and it's able to actually perform better for that specific task. So for writing, you could say you are an expert science fiction writer or an expert nonfiction writer, or whatever type of writer that you are going for. You could also go for you are an expert editor or an expert outliner, or whatever it is that you want to give it. You can go to town on giving it this identity and really getting specific about what it's good at and all of that sort of thing. And that sort of, again, narrows the focus of the AI so that it's not really considering a lot of stuff that isn't relevant to that particular job. The T in FITS is the most straightforward, and it stands for task. It's basically just your basic instructions on what you want it to do. And it usually takes less than a sentence to explain what this is. And the task combined with the framework and the identity does a really good job of giving the AI everything it needs to, in order to perform a task adequately. Now the S in FITS stands for style. And this one admittedly is optional. But if you're writing prose, or any kind of text, you'll want it to be in a certain style. So it's not just using the generic GPT style that is kind of nauseatingly permeating our environment. You want to give it something that can make it write better. And usually this involves a complicated style prompt that you can craft to include things like using active voice and avoiding certain words and stuff like that. However, with some of the models, you can actually take this to the next level and give it an example of your writing. So the GPT models and the Claude models are particularly good at this, where you give it a chapter of your writing, particularly the large models that can handle large contexts in the prompts, and say, write with a similar prose style to this example that I'm giving you. And then you give it, 1,000 to 2,000 words or so of examples of your writing, so it's able to write in that particular style. And a lot of the modern large language models are capable of actually giving pretty improved text just by making that one simple addition. So that is the FITS framework. Again, that stands for framework, identity, task, and style. The second thing I want to talk about is what I call the fractal technique. And this is very simple. It's simply starting small and then working your way up to something bigger. So let's say you're writing a book. You can say, I want to brainstorm a bunch of ideas for this book. And then so you use the AI to brainstorm all of those ideas. And then you can also go through and collect information on characters, world building, or if you're writing nonfiction, collecting your research, you can use a tool like Perplexity to help with that. But then once you have all of those little pieces, you can say, okay, I've got all this stuff and now we need an outline. And so you're building to the next stage of the process, which is to build your outline from your concept and your research and your ideas. And then from there, you expand it even further and create a more detailed outline of an individual chapter. So you can take chapter 1 and say, create a more detailed chapter of this chapter description that you've got here. And then you expand that outline even further and you actually create the prose. You take that fleshed out, really detailed outline and actually use it to create the prose of the book. And it just works in that sense where you start small and then you get progressively bigger and bigger until you have the fully fleshed out thing. Now, a key skill to get right during this whole process is the third tip and technique that I want to share with you, and that is validation. Now, I don't know exactly where the term validation got started in the AI writing community, but it's pretty widely used now. It's definitely entered the zeitgeist. Validating is basically just editing plus. So on every step of this fractal technique that I'm talking about, you want to take your output and validate it. All this simply means is that you look at it, you read through it, and you make sure it's okay. It might be okay just as is. It might require additional editing to get it to the point where you're happy with it. But I cannot stress enough that the validation process is necessary at every step of this fractal technique. You can't just have it give you an idea and then you write a book. You've got to give it an idea and then add your own creative input to it, validate it, look at it. Is this a good idea or not? If not, how can you make it better? You can use AI to brainstorm, but ultimately you are the person that is putting your stamp of approval on it. Once it's got that stamp of approval, you move on to the outlining phase. Personally, I like doing a lot of the outlining myself. So when I use AI for outlining, it's just for the brainstorming, just so I can get ideas on what to put down. And I might use an idea or two from the AI in my outline, but generally I'm going to be doing a lot of heavy editing to that outline to get it to be what I want it to be. And if you don't validate it there at the outlining stage, then when you're fleshing out the more fleshed out outline of each individual chapter, it's going to be building on a flawed outline. And so you need to make sure that your foundation is absolutely perfect perfect before you move on to the next step of creating the more fleshed out line, as well as the finished prose that comes after that. Now, if this sounds a little bit overwhelming to you, don't worry, you don't have to use the fractal technique. You can also do a form of discovery writing, which is where you just kind of start out and you give it what information you know, and it starts writing, and then you validate that instead. You validate the first couple hundred words or whatever it is that it has given you, and then that's likely to spark ideas for what comes next. And so you tell it what you want to come next, and then it gives you that, and you validate those words. And as you go on validating these words and making sure that the large language models are aware of what you have written / validated / edited, then it's going to be able to continue on, hopefully, in a very similar style to what you've validated in the past. So that's a more discovery written approach that I don't use myself because I am more of an outliner, but it's another way to go. And either way, you're going to need a lot of validation in that process. All right, the last technique that I want to talk to you in this beginner video is the process that we call chain of thought prompting. The way chain of thought prompting works is that you give the AI a chance to think. Now, a lot of the reasoning models do this automatically. You don't necessarily need to do chain of thought prompting, but sometimes it still is a helpful technique. So for instance, sometimes instead of asking it to just write something, you give it a prompt that asks it to make a plan to write that thing. And then you can fix up the plan, validate it as needed, but then you can take that plan and ask it to write based on that plan. And it will actually perform better when it has been given that time to think ahead of time and create that plan. I have a video where I talked about how to humanize the different AI output and put it in a specific style. And the method I used for that is basically I just said, compare these two writing styles and create a plan to make writing A more like writing B. And it would come up and create this plan. And then I would take that plan as well as both of the two writing styles, and I would say, make the writing of sample A more like sample B using this plan that you've already created. And then it would do that, and the output is significantly better when you do it in that way. So that's an example of chain of thought prompting, where you ask it to think through something first, and then you ask it to do the task. Now, in some cases, you can actually do this in a single prompt where you say to, carefully think through different steps first and then get to the actual writing of the thing. So it'll go through the steps that you ask it to think through things, and then it will get to the actual task in a single prompt. I find that doing one prompt at a time can sometimes be better, but both can work. And I know this whole prompt engineering thing can actually be pretty stressful for a lot of people, trying to think of all of these different prompts. And so I have two things for you. First of all, check out this video that I've got, which is going into why I believe prompt engineering, as we know it, is kind of dead. There is a tool that will help you easily create your own prompts or enhance the prompts that you already have to be a little bit better. And the second thing I have is a prompt library, which you can get for free by signing up for my email list. So go check that out. That link will be down below, along with my membership, which I've already talked about. So go check those out, and I'll see you in the next video.